Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hello, Bernard. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. Well, a shout out to our friend Gene Yang for the intro. And of course you are collaborating with him, but he's super awesome. So I'm really glad he introduced us.
Yes, Gene is an idol of mine, I should say. So, and a great all-around guy.
Yes, I'm in the same camp as you. And I know that off your air, we were talking that you might actually be drawing and sketching and meeting deadlines even today as we speak. So that's kind of amazing. I always find it incredible when artists can multitask that way because I can't draw like at all, but I wouldn't imagine that if I could, that I could do anything else at the same time. So I always find it kind of fascinating that this, that you're able to do two things at once.
Well, thank you. I mean, drawing the comic books, it's I kind of break it down into different um methods or different sections. So if I'm in a process of designing or coming up with layouts and where I have to really use my brain, then yeah, I really can't do anything else. Even like listening to music, it has to be melodic, not a lot of lyrics. But when I'm actually doing the technical performance, the technical drawing aspect, that becomes a rather kind of less brain focus intensive and more
Mhm.
technique. So then I can kind of balance back and forth.
Oh, I see. I've had actually the pleasure of speaking with a lot of different artists and comic creators on the show, and I always find it kind of fascinating how everyone has kind of that different process. And I think Michael Lark also was drawing while talking to me as well. And
Oh, okay.
I again, I think it's really cool. And I can say, yeah, that one piece. Am I allowed to know what you're working on, or is it a secret?
I'm drawing a cover for Monkey Prince right
All
now.
right. Well, that's
So,
perfect. And I can say, yeah, he was talking to me while he drew that cover. So, it's extra special.
I mean, even for myself, a lot of whatever work I do tends to have kind of a memory implant on some of the work. So
Okay.
a lot of times when people bring books to get signed, um, I'll flip through it and I'll remember, kind of like a little bit of what was going on in my life at the time.
Yeah.
Um,
What you were eating or if something was happening at that moment,
right.
like
Yeah.
specific to the moment or just more like at this era
Uh,
of my life.
Sometimes it's specific to the moment, depends on how traumatic that moment was. But a lot of times it's more kind of generally about how life was at that time. So,
Interesting. Wow. Well, I mean, I know that I've talked to Gene about the collaboration with you on Monkey Prince, and the art is just so beautiful. I was, kind of scanning through it and looking through it. I haven't sat to really get through the story and enjoy it because I want to take my time. And I'll be honest, I'm a bit of a binge reader, so I like to wait until I have like a good amount to really
mhm.
digest it. But I totally would be lying if I didn't say I was already like I already looked at a lot of the artwork of it and just saw the beauty of it. So, and of course, Gene and I get to talk a lot, and he of course told me that it would be just great to have a conversation with you. And as we both kind of have already professed, we're big fans of Gene, and you said he's a great guy. But what is it like to collaborate with him? Because I always love to hear about the collaboration process. Because each project I find, even if it's the same person, can be very different.
Well, Gene had only one, what was the word? Not criteria, contingency.
Okay.
And that's to not look him in the eye whenever you talk to him. Uh, I'm just joking. At this stage it was a bad joke. No, Gene is very personable. So, um, he's not a tyrant. Um, working in this career, I've been drawing comics professionally for 30 years since I was 20. And For what I really treasure, not only are the projects, but who I get to collaborate with. on the projects. And working on a comic book, it's really a combination of writing and artwork, and then storytelling, and taking ideas and concepts, and then being able to visualize them and put them in a format that you can hopefully, maybe when you're reading the book, if you flip through the artwork, you can kind of understand a little bit of what's happening.
Hmm.
Like my intent really is for the reader to not just to draw pretty pictures, but that when they're flipping through the book, that they're understanding just by looking at the artwork, what is the general premise of what's happening in the story. Um, and so a lot of that going back to is just working with different people, different collaborative processes. Gene has a particular writing style, and every writer that I've worked with kind of has their own unique kind of focus or attention. Um, and to me, that's the most rewarding aspect of what I do nowadays, along with just telling stories, but just who you're working with.
Yeah.
And I remember Gene, American Born Chinese came out right around the time I started working professionally. And I think a few years later, his book came out, and I, of course, picked it up and, read through it, and really was mesmerized by another person really also having Monkey King in that initial American-born Chinese story. And because he and I both share a similar childhood story where my father used to read to me bedtime stories about the Monkey King, Sun Wukong.
Hmm.
Because when my family immigrated to the States from Taiwan, I was 6 years old. So
Okay.
I started reading a lot of comic books, Batman, Spider-Man, Superman. And my father saw that I was taking a liking to all of these American heroes. And he said, let me introduce you to an actual authentic Chinese superhero.
Yeah.
And he had a friend from Taiwan mail to him a book. I mean, it was The Journey of the West. It was like a really thick book. And it was all written in Chinese. There were no pictures.
Hmm.
It was just words. So he would just sit to me bedtime every night and read to me a few pages. And I would have to go to sleep, um, imagining these, um, wonderful stories. And so when Jessica, who's the editor, Jessica Chan, brought us together, and Gene shared his story where his mother would read to him bedtime stories, um, you know, instantly there was a connection. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. And this is a thing, something Gene and I talked about as well, just kind of having the Monkey King present in our lives, in our youth, because we all, I believe, had an image of what that character looked like and sounded like and would appear. Because for me as well, my father, I didn't have like the actual books. I have like the classical collections and stuff now, but like I didn't have the books per se, but I remembered there was like a little square, almost like a post-it note that's connected and then it like pulls out, and it was kind of like a little characters and depiction. And being a martial artist, of course, that the Monkey King stories there's a lot of philosophy there, and a lot of tales that are meant to teach you
mhm.
teach you lessons. And so I was so excited, like you, when I read American Born Chinese and saw his depiction and bringing that character in. And then of course when Monkey Prince came out, it was like very exciting to be able to kind of have a bit of an update. But also I told Gene that I hold him solely responsible for helping me learn more about my Chinese culture in the way that like Stan Sakai has helped me understand so much about the Japanese culture through his stories, and in just a fun way, and for our youth and everything. So I love that. And he told me that you both, because you have that love for the Monkey King and you have those childhood stories, that you went down some pretty deep rabbit holes of research. Is that true?
Oh yeah, I mean, um, going back to that childhood story, my parents divorced when I was 10. So, um, my father never finished the Journey to the West story for me as a bedtime story.
Oh.
And at that time, there wasn't a lot of literature available, or translated literature, again,
Mhm.
because I can't read Chinese. Um, And so for the longest time, I just kind of, and also because the parents divorced, I went to live with my mother. I never completed that story arc. Um, and as this project came to fruition, it allowed me an opportunity to kind of tie up loose ends, and
Yeah.
allowed kind of open the door back to um, figuring out exactly what happened towards the end. I mean, he was pretty close to the ending, anyways. And all through my youth, there would always be like little Monkey King things here or there, that I would have like little statues and whatever memories that I had drawn from the stories that were already told to me. Um, but yeah, going through and researching for this again, looking up all the different, going back and rereading the series, um, and then thinking about different possibilities and how to kind of readapt um, uh, a story that's really been told so many times since. And there's been, like movies out I mean, especially in Asia, there's been movies out, there's television shows, there's readaptations, the westernized adaptations of Journey to the West. Um, and, there's cartoons, animation. Um, so part of that is how do we kind of go back to the root, original source, but also capture what were essences that were important to us
Mhm.
as storytellers, what we remember, what we want to focus, and then um, kind of then put back down on paper to share with readers. And I think any kind of project like that, it's exciting, it's challenging, it's also scary.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, you can't please everybody. Um, there are some diehard Journey to the West, Sun Wukong fans that are like, this is not my Sun Wukong that I remember.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
but and honestly, too, this is an opportunity to introduce kind of the Journey to the West to a newer audience as well,
Mhm.
and to expand and bring in, because I mean, the Journey to the West, Sun Wukong, like he does a lot of like stuff that probably you wouldn't be telling in a kids series anymore these days.
Yeah.
It's like he's killing people and he's
Yeah.
killing demons and doing some pretty dastardly things. So yeah, but that's also part of the fun of being working in a creative field, is to be able to go down these rabbit holes and to be able to explore and to question, and to then readapt and to kind of place our own fingerprints um, on this story and on this new story, on this new journey that we're kind of carving out.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I have to admit when Gene told me to talk to you, I was like, okay, let me, look up your bio and get some information. And I read that you were an architect, you're like NBA bound, and obviously you're this talented artist. So I was like, way to be an underachiever, Bernard. And I mean, growing up as Asian American here, and of course, I'd love to hear a little more about like your childhood and when you immigrated, what that was like for you. But um what was the dynamic like, I guess, for you moving here from Taiwan, and how did you adapt? Or where did you move to?
Well, I was born in Canada, in
Okay.
Montreal.
Mhm.
My
Oh,
father
your
was getting
parents
his,
moved from Taiwan and you born in Canada.
uh,
Got it.
yeah, so my parents met in Taiwan, then they moved to
Mhm.
Canada, where
Mhm.
they got married, then they moved to Canada. And my father was getting his PhD at McGill University in Montreal. So I was born then, but then before I turned one, we moved back to Taiwan. I
Okay.
got a teaching job um, at Zhongyang Daxue in Zhongli, just outside of Taipei. And
Mhm.
so I kind of grew up in a small university town. My mother and my father's family both lived in Taipei, different areas of Taipei.
Okay.
So my mother and I would go into Taipei, and my father as well. And then when I was 6, we immigrated to the States. My father got a job teaching chemistry. He was a professor of chemistry at Purdue University in West
Okay.
Lafayette, Indiana. So I kind of had that Midwestern upbringing when I was a little boy.
Oh,
Um, and then again, my parents got divorced when I was 10. So fourth grade, my mother and I moved down to Miami, Florida, because I was like the only family on my mother's side that had immigrated to the States prior to.
okay.
And I kind of grew up mostly in Miami until I went to college in New York City at Pratt. So it's kind of a very, growing up in Taiwan in a small town, I remember a lot of different things. I'm actually going back to Taiwan this week.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of stuff going on, so we'll see
Yeah.
how that trip goes.
I was gonna
Um,
say, be safe.
but living in that small town, I remember there were these bomb shelters.
Oh,
There were
okay.
these hills, these mounds at the end of each block. And every now and then you'd have like a bomb drill. Like you'd have to go into these bomb shelters. They were like super scary because they're super dark and damp.
Yeah.
But there was always a constant threat of communist invasion.
Yeah.
The Kuomintang was going to come and bomb, Taiwan. So
Hmm.
even back then, that was a threat.
Hmm.
And going to going to kindergarten, I was beginning to learn the Bopomofo and beginning to read a little bit, but it wasn't that good. I can still pick out certain words. My name,
Me too.
um, WC is all you really need to know when you go back, right? Because that's where the bathrooms are.
That's right.
Um,
WC, it's important.
and conversation I can speak. So,
Hmm.
um, and then Indiana was like a very Midwest kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
I went to first through fourth grade there. I didn't speak a word of English when I showed up. I think took about 3 months to become kind of proficient.
Okay.
Um, at that time,
Was
like
was that hard for you at that time with the I mean, how are kids? Because kids can be so cruel, right? And so,
I, there was a little bit of bullying. Like there's a story that my mother told me, reminded me, like when I first showed up to school, they didn't speak English, so we had recess, and during recess, I'm playing in the sandbox, and some kid comes up to me and says, "Hey, your name's Banana, right?" I didn't know. I mean, I just heard the B, and I thought it sounded kind of like Bernard. My Chinese name is Bo Na, so it's very similar.
okay.
So I just nodded and smiled and said, "Yeah." And the kid laughed and went away. The next day, he shows up again with a couple buddies and does the same thing. Hey, is your name Banana? And I said, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, hi. And then they all laugh, and this proceeded for like a few days. I didn't know. Um, I thought I was making a friend. But then there was another Chinese kid, and he kind of oversaw all this. And he came up to me. He's like, "Hey, Bernard, they're not." He said to me in Chinese, like, "Bernard, they're not actually talking to you nicely. He's calling you banana."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, can you teach me a little English? So next time he comes up, I can say something back to him."
Yeah.
And I asked him to teach me to say something specific. So the following day, the kid comes back with another group of kids, waiting to show off how he can, make fun of me. And um, he said, "Hey, is your name Banana?" And I said to him, I looked him in the eye, I said, "No, my name's Bernard, and I'm your friend." And uh, those words, like you could see, like I guess, initial disappointment, hopefully embarrassment on his, and never bothered me again. Um, but that was something I guess um, had happened. I had forgotten about it for a while. And then my mother
Yeah.
reminded me, and it's like sometimes you can um, face cruelty with kindness. Sometimes you want to bash it in the face.
Right.
But it is important to stand up for yourself in however form. Um, so that was kind of my Indiana experience,
Yeah.
right? But also like looking back at it, I mean, it's Indiana. Um, I'm still a big Purdue fan. I developed a tremendous love for sports
Hmm.
while I was there. It was a huge part of every day after school we would play ball.
Hmm.
Um, and it's, I guess growing up, you always met with some kind of adversity, cruelty. And in Miami, I would be one of the only Asian kids in all the schools that I went to.
Hmm.
Um, uh, in different schools, different areas, different neighborhoods. Um, but part of it is paving your own path, your own identity. All of us, I think, struggle at some point in our youth to identify what is Asian American. How do we kind of carve out our own path in
Yeah.
this country as Americans, and uh, what is the right way to do things. So
Yeah, no, that story of what you said to your bullier was so heartwarming. I was like, oh my gosh, because how old were you? You're under 10 years old, right? And so it
I
was
was
just
probably like six. Yeah,
yeah, it's
probably six
amazing
because it's
that
first grade.
that was your what you asked to be, be taught. I think that just says a lot to who you are um
I think it would
and
be
your
more exciting if
personality.
I said I punched the kid in the face and it never came
No,
back. But
I actually don't think so
um,
at all. Because that's just your typical schoolyard stuff. I think, wow, actually think it's super powerful what you just shared. And especially as a martial arts teacher, it's the irony is we try to teach that path where you're like not having to punch the kid in the face. I
right.
mean, you're right though. Sometimes some kids deserve to have if there's a physical threat and everything, but like I think that kindness and compassion is definitely the the more the kinder way, and I think if we can be that way, I think we'd all be in a better place. But
Yeah.
I really that really resonates with me because I do talk to a lot of people in the show, especially in the last few years. I'm sure maybe Gene has shared with you, like a lot of the work I do is a lot of activism and advocacy. I'm in Florida actually, so your Miami roots
Oh, okay.
very much resonate with me, and I'm actually been writing a bill to include Asian American history in school. And so last year, of course, it didn't pass because yay Florida. But this year we're going at it. Like I feel really good. But it's been an interesting dynamic to speak to so many people about their experiences. And like you said, like what is Asian American identity? Because we're not a monolith, and there's so much to learn. And I didn't get to learn about Asian Americans in history in the classroom. And so
Right.
I feel like there's so much for us to help others understand so that they don't get called banana in school, right? And so that they
Hmm.
don't even have to necessarily um, have those situations, but and then when they do, they're armed with more information, right? And so I think just having that education. But I was curious as to if you're open to sharing like what your thoughts were on the last few years with all of the rise of the anti-Asian hate crimes and all of the anti-Asian sentiment, kind of pulling from like what you remember as a child and then kind of seeing that like not a lot or not enough has changed, and also like in some ways I feel like there's some regression. But what has been your response?
Um, well, I think I've always viewed myself as a slightly militant when it comes to Asian American issues. Um, you know, aside from that peaceful "I'm your friend" story, I mean, I did get into fights when I was younger, so um, I can't claim that I was completely at peace with everything. But
Yeah.
um, it is empowering to see Asian Americans stand up and begin to activate and be heard. I've always considered myself somewhat militant. I feel like we look at our African American brothers and sisters, and there was a Martin Luther King, but there was also a Malcolm X,
Hmm.
and we need to speak our voice. And if all too many times, especially when I was younger, like the first day of school, my mother would be like, "You have to behave because uh, what would they think of Chinese people? What
Hmm.
would they think of Asians?" Oh, they said Chinese. Now it's Asian, but and also Chinese. That term has kind of changed because although my
Yes.
parents are from mainland China, grew up in Taiwan.
Hmm.
Um, what would they think of Chinese people? you have to be an example for all of us
All of
to
yes,
them.
yeah. The burden of
Yeah,
all Chinese
yeah.
reputation is
And
on your shoulders.
if I misbehave or I'm, rude or do something silly, then our whole ethnic race is embarrassed. And
Yeah.
um, and that was from day one. So how do you go from that into, this is also our country. And I would ask my mother, some of this is also pursuing a career, a creative field. Right. All of us have kind of the stereotypical growing up, like your parents want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, a businessman, or a professor. Um, when I started working professionally, I was 20, saved up my money the first year, and I ended up buying my mom a house in Miami. Growing up watching these pro athletes, whenever they signed their first contract, they would buy their mom a house or a car. So that was something that I kind of aspired to at a young age. And so when I bought her a house and I handed her the keys, she was happy, but she also said, "So when are you getting your master's degree?" It's like, okay, all right. There's still a little bit of convincing to do, right? I mean, uh, as a creative person, you're fighting a um, yourself. You're fighting your own skill set, your own talent, your own inner doubt, right? B, you got to fight against the outside world, the man. You got to fight against forces that are um, suppressing you or preventing you from getting your work or succeeding. And then the third thing is you got to fight against your parents, your family, your loved ones. It's not I mean, a literal, sometimes a little fight, but it's, you know, I come to at the end of the day, I think, look, my mother just wants me to be happy, to be comfortable. She doesn't want me to go through the suffering that she went through. Her generation, their generation, she grew up during World War II, during the Civil War, uh, and had to immigrate to Taiwan, had to flee to Taiwan. Um, if they didn't, the whole family would have been locked up or killed. And even in Taiwan, there was at that time a very transitional period. Um, it wasn't as rosy as growing up in the States. So there was certainly a lot of uncertainty in their
Mhm.
life. And I think growing up with that, they only want what is perhaps maybe a more well-traveled path. And everybody thinks artists are, poor and starving, and it is a very difficult field. It's not a regular 9 to 5.
Mhm.
It's you have to constantly hustle. Um, but I often say to her, like, look, our family immigrated to the States for particular reasons, right? And at the time was, American has this American dream, illusion of an American dream. And I asked her, like, was there ever anything that she wanted to do when she was younger, growing up in Taiwan? And she wanted to be a ballerina, a dancer. But her parents didn't think that was the right path for her. I think she mentioned they felt like, maybe, I don't know, they were a little conservative with the clothing, ballerinas. And
Mhm.
so she ended up pursuing a path as a nurse. Um, I said, well, look, we moved here to the States. Part of that dream was for me to pursue a path um, that I would want. And as long as I'm good at it, and it's not a bad thing, not like stealing, and I'm able to sustain and support myself and dedicate myself to it. Um, why not be supportive of that? It is something that most people don't go down. It is an unexplained path. There is no one way to break into comic books or anything
Mhm.
in the creative arts.
Yeah.
Um, all I need is your support. because I'm also fighting against all of these other things in life. I'm constantly fighting against even my own skill set of constantly improving, this craft and becoming more efficient, becoming a better storyteller, becoming a better draftsman, fighting against complacency. And then I'm also fighting against, corporations or other people. Or, so
competition.
I need support. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, early on, I never showed my mother hardly any of my work.
Okay.
Part of that was I would show her afterwards, but not while I was working on stuff. And
I see.
I grew up with a teacher mentor told me, like, don't ever show your work to your parents or your friends, because they're only going to love what you do, right? They're not going to hurt. They don't want to hurt your feelings. They only want to, kind of be encouraging at times. And this kind of counter to a little bit of what I'm saying, but I think, she's very encouraging of my craft, of my artwork, because I mean, when I was young, she actually got me an art tutor.
Okay.
When I was young, I played the violin. She got me, took me to lessons every week.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like she wasn't encouraging of kind of this creative aspect
Right.
in my life growing
But
up,
maybe not as a career.
but maybe not as a career, right? Because as a career, you have to sustain, you have to pay the bills, you
Right.
have to do all these things. So you need to make money. And so why not do something that's more stable? And then you can pursue crafts, arts, as a hobby.
For fun.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, why can't I just do that if I can, sustain myself and us? So I said, there's a reason why we moved here, and it's the promise of the quote unquote American dream is to pursue our passions. And so I don't know. I don't know if I even answered your question.
Well, I mean, was this like one conversation or has it been like several over the years?
It's
Because I
been
mean, just
over,
from my
yeah.
parents' perspective, I mean, it's never one conversation.
All right, it's never. It's one of like numerous conversations over and over
Yeah.
again. And
Yeah.
then eventually, at some point, I think in my 40s, she stopped asking if I was gonna, because then it was like, okay, well now you can go and teach, right? So then I said, okay, I'm gonna go get a job. I said, I don't need a master's degree to teach as in a creative field. If I'm working professional,
Yeah.
uh, someone's gonna hire me if they want me to teach, right? So she's like, wow. I mean, I was actually about basketball when I was playing in college.
Yeah.
I wasn't really like any good. I mean, I was okay, I was but after I graduated college, I was an assistant coach for the college. And then after the first season as an assistant coach, they had hired me as the acting head coach. So I was actually a college basketball head coach
Oh, okay.
for a few months before I resigned to move out to LA to work at Disney. So that's teaching, right? And then I said to her, so then okay, I'm going to go get a job teaching. So I went and got a job teaching at Art Center, College of Design here in LA. And just to show her, like, look, I don't need a degree to do that stuff. There's other paths to get to where you want to go.
Right. Right. Right.
Sorry, so my birds.
Okay, I was like, I was like, oh, is that a bird or is that a squeaky chair?
Let me let them out.
What kind of birds do you have?
They're two parrotlets.
Oh,
They're miniature parrots.
okay.
They're like about this big. So
Wow.
they hear me talking.
And so they're
Um,
talking to you.
so they want to, yeah.
All right. Well, so our listeners not only are getting to hear from you, but also from your birds. So this is like a bonus. It's an added bonus. But I'd love to hear a little bit about the basketball training, just because you seem. I mean, I think you're downplaying your skill set. I mean, to be asked to coach and do all of those things, clearly you were above average of a player, and to even play in college, I think is quite an achievement. And as somebody who has like a lot of physicality in their life and that's like kind of what I do. I'm curious how, one, do you still play basketball? And then two, how does that play into being an artist? Do you find like any parallels in there, or one that helps the other, or, for your creativity?
I think there are a lot of parallels, although there are actually not a lot of artists that are into sports.
Hmm.
I would say most of my artist friends are not really into sports, never played sports, or might
Yeah.
watch a little bit, but not really, never really participated in
Like an
organized team
organized.
sports,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, in an organized capacity. I mean, I went to Pratt Institute in New York. They're a small school, so the NCAA Division III.
Hmm.
So Division One, Two, Three, they don't offer athletic scholarships.
Okay.
I got an architecture scholarship, so it was separate.
I see.
They do offer grants. Anybody's looking at going to college sports, but um, I just enjoyed playing sports. You
Yeah.
know, in high school, there was no sports program in my high school.
Oh,
Um, so I started one. Um, it was a brand new magnet art high school in Miami called
okay.
New World School of the Arts.
Okay.
And it was like based off of the school in LaGuardia School in New York City, which was that
Mhm.
TV show Fame.
Yeah.
We have to audition to get in. It's either
Yes.
music, dance, theater, or art.
Mm.
And once you got in, you had to major in one of those. And
Mhm.
then that was it. You had intensive 8 classes a day. Four were your academics, and then the other four were your, oh, actually, five were academics and three were your arts. And so it was a lot of training very early on.
Yeah.
But there was no athletic program because the principal was like, you don't need sports. You don't have enough time for sports. But I found a group of friends that
Yeah.
wanted to play at first baseball. We ended up playing softball. And so I would rally everybody together, organize the games. We played in a couple local tournaments. We played against the college women's team. Um, we had uniforms,
Yeah.
um, and it kind of became like a nice school spirit kind of activity.
Yeah.
Um, but also in that, you saw like in athletics, there's so much training involved.
Mhm.
People talk about talent, but a lot of talent really starts really is just about starting at a young age, developing motor skills or particular abilities so that your body and your mind begins to train and absorb certain things. As an artist, I started drawing when I was probably 3 or 4, as early as I can remember, with my cousins. Um, and so it's that 10,000 hours of like proper training.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people say 10,000 hours, but it's really 10,000 hours of proper training.
Mhm.
Um, and so you need to start at a young age, but also you need to be repetitive and you need to be drawing things that you might not want to draw. So, like in
Mm.
athletics, if you're playing basketball, well, you can maybe if you can dunk, that's great. But if you don't know how to dribble, if you don't know how to pass, if you don't know how to play defense, if you don't know how to play team defense, if you don't know how to read particular situations, um, then you're not going to play. If you can't make a free throw at the end of the
Mhm.
game, you're not going to be in the court. So those are all kind of small things, right? But in art, if you can only draw faces, well, I see that in a lot of young artists. Like they just like to draw faces,
Mhm.
maybe up like a torso, right? Because they're replicating a human form, and it's fun, and then it's rewarding because you're looking at another human, you're creating something
Right.
that you
That you
recognize.
recognize, yeah.
Yeah, but then they don't draw like cars or buildings or rooms. They just, oh, it's not, whatever. It's not important. It's the face. Well, in comics, you're telling stories, and like right now, I'm sitting in front of a green screen.
Mhm.
Well, it's like a curtain, right? Because I have a Twitch stream, so I green screen out everything. Um,
Yeah.
it's like when you watch pictures, still images of like an Iron Man movie or
Mhm.
a Batman movie, and they have a hero, but they're floating in front of a green screen. And then
Yeah.
later on, they CGI the city in the background. Well, me sitting here is kind of boring. I mean, you don't know where I am. There's no context. It's just me.
Hmm.
But if in the background we were to put like a cityscape, oh, all of a sudden, now there's context, now there's story. If it's like if I had the ocean behind me, are you talking to me and I'm on a boat? Oh, wow, that's kind of crazy. Or if I'm on the plane and there's like, I think I have like, we're in Zoom, so I can actually put in,
The backgrounds.
um, my Zoom game was pretty good last year, 2 years
Right.
ago.
When all we did was Zoom constantly.
Right. Now where's the button for the background?
It makes so
Choose
much sense
virtual
though.
background.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if any of this stuff. Yeah.
Oh
So,
yeah.
you can put in different things. I have like so if we're talking, all of a sudden I'm like flying.
Yeah.
uh, it creates a different sensibility. If I'm driving, I have a steering wheel somewhere. It's, for this one, um,
Yeah.
and all of those are um, kind of components, right? So um, I tell young artists, aspiring comic book artists, um, I can show you maybe like a couple of things, or how I can tell you and train you how I think, or what I'm looking at
Hmm.
as an artist. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to put in the hours to learn how to draw. And it's not that hard. Nothing I'm teaching is rocket science because everything is available to you around you. Some kids will ask me, like, how do you draw hands? I'm like, well, you have two hands in front of you. Granted, one has to hold the pencil, whether it's right or left, right? So if you're drawing with your right, then your left hand. But then you have something to look at.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
just boring. You want to cheat, but
Yeah.
just sit down and draw your hand. And if you can't even get it, if you can't get it at the right angle, well, now you got technology and you have a phone. Take a picture of your hand at that angle that you want, then look at it from the phone,
Hmm.
and now you have it. So so often, it's not about cutting corners. It's about really learning the fundamentals,
Hmm.
continuously practicing the fundamentals. Because if you look at LeBron James or Steph Curry, probably one of those most prolific shooters in the NBA, scorers. Um, but he doesn't just shoot during the game. And before the game, he's shooting around. In between games, he's practicing getting shots up, a few hundred a day. In the off season, when there are no more games, he's still practicing on shots, or on new moves, new step backs or new crossover moves. Um, so the work is constant. How much you put in is how much you're going to get out. And so that's kind of like my approach of mending athletics with art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, it makes complete sense to me. As a, kung fu teacher, pretty much that's what we tell people. It's your fundamentals, your basics, consistency over time. And
yeah,
everybody comes in and they want to play with the swords and fly and do all the
right.
fancy things. And I'm like, so we're going to be in a horse dance for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not exciting at first, but if you want to get good, right? So it's what's your
Hmm.
goal? If you actually want to improve and get
Right.
good and you want to reach a higher level, I'm with you. It makes a lot of sense, but I love how you kind of broke down that correlation, because from a learning perspective, it really resonates and you could see it.
Yeah. I mean, you really have to, and the more well-rounded you are,
Hmm.
the faster you can actually specialize in
Yeah.
particular things, because then you can actually understand the components of what it is that you're actually doing. Um, Again, like I tell a lot of young artists, like if you learn how to draw perspective, if you learn volumetric and you're looking at things in 3 dimension, that will actually help your figure drawing, because then you're understanding the shape of the human face. And when it turns in particular angles, whether it's down 3/4, straight on, whatever angle, you're able to replicate it, because now you're not just drawing iconic shapes, where if you put two dots in a thing, in a curve, that's a face, that's a smiley face. But you're actually beginning to draw an actual human face. And then on top of that, you can then add in emotions. When I brought up, when I brought down, whatever. All of these different facial expressions can then evoke emotion. And then once you start adding that component with storytelling backgrounds, camera angles, how you move through scenes, um, now you become a storyteller.
Mhm.
And it's not just drawing something pretty,
Mhm.
um, but
Is
you're actually
there,
telling a story.
yeah, is there something when you were kind of that young artist that you had to draw over and over that you absolutely hated, that you're like, oh, I have to, but I have to do this? Is there kind of a thing that you can recall?
Yeah, I mean, like still lifes, we used to put like stuff down on the table, like apples,
Mhm.
shoes, books, and all that stuff. And then we
Yeah.
have to sit there and draw it. And, teacher's like, well, you gotta do this, you gotta do, line pencil, I was like, oh, okay, I finished the pencil drawing, right? Like, no, now, redo it, re-examine the shape, the shadow, how
Wow.
different things, like if you look at this shoulder where there's not a lot of background, so I can't really use this that much, but you can see also back here, there's a little bit of light coming through the window behind me because I have like a big window behind me actually.
Mm.
So there's different values, even though there's a slight fold in the curtain, but there's different lighting. Um, all of that, once you really begin to examine, break down um, everything that you draw. If you draw it once, you can draw it twice. If you draw it twice, the third or fourth time, you can then start designing and redrawing and improving it.
Mm.
And there's so many different layers beyond just replicating,
Yeah.
right? You're not just trying to draw a pretty picture. I'm not just trying to draw you to look like you. I'm trying to draw an impersonation of you or how I feel about you at that time. Because if I wanted to draw a perfect picture of you, why not just take a picture? We all
Yeah.
have cameras.
Right.
Um, but if I wanted to draw you smiling or you crying or you questioning, that's something different. And that's something that's, to me, more powerful than being able to replicate um, another image.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
so
And I was curious when, like I said, I kind of milled through your bio, and being from Florida and being in Orlando, Disney is very present in our lives here. And I saw that you did work as a blue sky concept designer for Walt Disney Imagineering. And one, can you share with our listeners like what that really is and what that experience was like and what it entails?
yeah, sure. So I spent 4 years as a Walt Disney Imagineer designing rides for theme parks. My position was as a what they call a blue sky concept designer. Blue sky meaning that there's no ceiling.
Mm.
So anything you come up with, there's no ceiling to contain the idea. I go into meetings and they'd be like, well, come back in a couple of days with some ideas. And I would have to formulate those ideas and then present them in a drawing or a model
Okay.
or towards the end, like a animated computer kind of walkthrough. Very simple, So part of it is like if I use an example of Space Mountain, everybody's been on Space Mountain, right? It's a roller coaster ride that's inside uh, this kind of futuristic spaceship kind of dome.
Hmm.
And the theme of the ride is that you jump on and you got to go from the space station to another space station. I think the last time I went on it, it was sponsored by FedEx, so it had kind of like this delivery, you're delivering
Theme.
packages or something, right? But it's not just a roller coaster, but it's like a journey through space. And part of that, then, because it's enclosed and it's all dark, and you can see stars and you can see other comets zipping through, there's a particular exhilaration and story behind the ride.
Mm.
If you go on Indiana Jones, the Indiana Jones ride, the Q space, you're walking through the mind space where the archaeologists beforehand had discovered all of these different little artifacts and things. And so by the time you get onto the ride, you kind of immerse yourself into that world. So
Mm.
part of what I did was like to come up with, if you were to come up with Space Mountain, you'd be like, okay, well, let's do like a roller coaster ride, but let's say it's a space ride, but I want to, I want you to feel like you're in space. Usually roller coasters are outside. So then I think we need to be enclosed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a story about maybe flying from a space station to a planet or launching from a space pad, going into space on this journey, and then
Mm-hmm.
landing somewhere. Um, and then that would be kind of the very high level, um, you know, design work.
Yeah.
And then
Did you
from
enjoy
there,
that?
then you start breaking. It was amazing. I mean, I go
Yeah.
into,
Because you have an
you know,
architect background too, I would imagine that kind of comes into play.
yeah, the architecture, I have a degree in architecture. I
Yeah.
gave that to my mom too.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but also,
Such a
you know,
good
like,
son.
right. I mean, art really in reality, you know, I considered going to art
Uh,
school. I mean, I did go to art school, but I considered getting a degree in art. The degree in art is really meaningless. I tell any art school, even if their art schools invite me to lecture, to provide a lecture, I'll tell them, the first thing I tell the kids is like, look, you graduate from here, you have your degree, it doesn't mean anything.
yeah.
It's your portfolio that matters.
Yeah.
So case in point, you know, I went to architecture school. I was studying architecture and I got my first professional gig when I was 20. So I was
Mhm.
still studying. I was still in school,
Yeah.
but I was drawing comic books. They didn't care that. In fact, I think they would have rather me not go to school because then I could devote all my time to the company.
Yeah.
Um, but they cared about your portfolio. Um,
Hmm.
so architecture was a great eye-opening experience in terms of design, in terms of ways of thinking of storytelling, but also ways of thinking in terms of how things are. Why are they that way? How can you improve and make it more efficient or better or more exciting? Um, and so that kind of background, because in Imagineering, there are also concept architects. There are also guys that are there that do concept architecture.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was just coming up with ideas.
Right.
And um,
And did you like
I'd
going on
go
those
into,
rides that you worked
well,
on?
yeah, a perk was that, you know, I did do some research trips. You go into the backstage of Disneyland
Mhm.
and you know, you can see how things are actually in reality. There's
Yeah.
actually a lot of meeting rooms behind where
Yes.
they would take corporate sponsors and, you know, kind of show them around and take them
Yes.
into the park. Um, and so you know, part is you have to go on all the rides, you have to go on all these different things, even to some of the competing theme parks. You know, I had to go to Universal Studios at the time and
Hmm.
go and experience some of the stuff that they had.
Oh, okay.
But also, you know, we had trips where we went to different small towns, different places, depending on the project. Um, Being in that moment, being in that space, and then trying to replicate that authenticity back into the work. Trying to bring that authenticity back into the work in some form, because it's all about the experience. Um, I used to, when I first started, I go into these meetings. They have these charrettes, brainstorming sessions
Hmm.
where they, you know, go into a conference room and you'd have like 20 creatives in there, some executives, and they're like, "Oh, we've got this project. Let's try to come up with some ideas on what this could be." And you know, everybody would introduce themselves at first, and I was the youngest guy there. I was like 24, 20, 25,
Yeah.
25, 26, 25, 26, yeah. And I would sit there, and everybody there was like 40, 50 years old, some in the early 60s. They had designed all of these rides that I went on as a kid. You know, living in Miami, I mean, Orlando is like a few hours away, but
Yeah.
anytime family would come,
They want to go to
we'd have to,
Disney.
yeah, we'd have to go to Disney. It was Disney and also Gatorland. We'd have to go to Gatorland.
Gatorland.
Yeah. Um,
That's my hood. Gatorland and Disney.
right. And and I
Terrible.
loved Epcot. Epcot was
Oh,
one of my favorite places because they had all these new sci-fi, like high-tech, kind of
yes.
futuristic,
Very
you know,
future. Hmm.
communities and futuristic technology. So I would go there and wow, this is what the world can be like, right? And it's only like a few years away,
Yeah.
and all this stuff is being developed. Um, and so I would sit in these meetings and like everybody would be like, "Oh, I designed this, I worked on this." I'd be, "Oh shit, these are all
Yeah.
like idols." And so I remember early on in these meetings, I would kind of be very quiet at
Mm.
first. Um, I would let some of the senior guys talk, and then I would, towards the middle to the end of the meeting, I would then like put out some ideas that I had.
Yeah.
But a lot of those were just trying to be as different from them as possible. But also to not repeat. My biggest fear was to repeat something that they might have said or done
Right.
previously already. So what I didn't want to hear was, oh, we already thought about that in this last project. So no,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to be different. I wanted to be
Mm-hmm.
unique, and I wanted to try to position myself. I mean, I'm already like the only Asian guy in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm already the youngest guy in the room. So I figure the only way for me to add value would be to come up with something that they have not come up with. And from my perspective, what would be something that would be completely unique? And again, in those meetings, it's about sparking ideas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So some of it would just be asking questions first
Right.
before
Right.
really stating something.
Yeah.
Um,
You got to feel out the room too and start to get to know people when it's kind of a situation like that, I would guess.
right. But it got to
Just
be actually, sorry, it got to be a very lonely position,
really.
because there were a lot of projects that I worked on that were very top secret.
Oh, so you could
Um,
talk about, I know I had,
yeah,
I
so I
understand.
can't
We work with Disney a lot. So
so you can't talk about these projects.
yeah.
And I worked on a project for an entire year where there was maybe 8 or 10 of us on the entire project.
Yeah.
And I couldn't talk to anybody, so going to lunch, you're going to lunch with other coworkers in the office,
Yeah.
and it's only human nature that they're going to ask you, hey, Bernard, what are you working on today? Or what's going on, these days? And I would say, look, I can't talk about it. Even though we're both Imagineers and we both work for Disney,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I could not talk to another Disney employee that wasn't on the project
Right.
with
Right.
about what
Right.
I was doing. So then I eventually just ate lunch in my office after a certain point,
Oh.
because it just got to like, I can't talk to any of these guys about it. And it's not like I don't trust them. I
Yeah,
want to be able to like,
but you send that NDA. So
yeah. And, the big fear with the company is that, okay, let's say I talk to you
mm-hmm.
and maybe next day you get a better offer from Universal or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go over there and you're like, well, we were talking, well, what about this idea?
Yeah.
And then they're able to build it faster,
Right.
because they have the
Right.
means to do it. And then if we
Exactly.
were to come out second, then you lose out on a lot of development. So I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
Disney, everything was designed or created in-house.
Oh yes.
So it's very expensive. And I would say 90% of the things that I worked on never got made.
Really?
Yeah, most of the
Wow.
most of the
That's
projects that I
surprising.
worked on never got made.
Wow.
Um, I mean, there are
Yeah.
maybe like some things that have like a slight hint or a slight
Right. Right.
thing.
Right. But totally
Um,
different direction.
yeah, and sometimes it's just budget,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's just direction,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes sometimes it's not the right idea.
Yeah.
Um, but there are so many hurdles to clear
Yeah. I
in
think people don't
getting,
realize that. They just
yeah,
show up to Disney World and everything's there. And
right.
the behind the
And then
scenes
also like
is
what was funny too is like the first day of employee orientation, the
uh,
legal department came in and
traditions.
said, yeah, well, they said, if you get an email or a letter from someone you don't know or anyone, and the words start saying, I have an idea for, if you read those words, you have to stop reading the rest of the letter,
Oh,
fold it, put it into a inner office, and then send it to the legal department. If
wow.
you get an email, you have to stop reading and then forward it to the legal department.
Oh, wow.
Um, because you can't, as a concept designer, you can't read someone else's unsolicited ideas.
Mm.
It might sit in the back of my brain, for a year or two,
Yes. And then it was someone else's
and
idea.
yeah, well, and then it comes out in some other form unknowingly, because it's
Right.
just sitting in my brain now. It's been stewing in there with all these other things, and then somehow it oozes out into something. And the guy's like, "Hey, I wrote you an email. I wrote you a letter, 5 years ago, with this very same idea or this very same concept. And now you guys have stolen it and built it." Um, so it became like, there's a lot of legal issues that you have to
Yeah.
kind of
I
deal
mean,
with.
that takes kind of a lot of restraint though to be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna stop and just
it's that's why it became like, man, you got any mail, letters, email, things like that from us. So even nowadays too, with comic books, I
Yeah.
get people that DM me or, hey, I have this great idea for this character or storyline. I have to like email back saying, look, I'm sorry, I can't accept any unsolicited
Mhm.
material. Appreciate your support and enthusiasm, but I can't read any of this and I can't accept any of this. And you have to delete the email. So I don't have legal department. I mean, I do have a lawyer, but I don't want
Right, right. Yeah,
to.
you don't want to be involved in
Yeah,
any of that. Well, you
right.
learned that though, right? From working with Disney. That's the thing with the mouse, right? They've got their ducks in a row
Hmm.
and there's a reason, right? There's a reason they do what they do and how they do
And,
it. So,
yeah, and I had a great time working for them. I mean,
yeah.
a great company, uh, so big that they have their own sports leagues, inner company sports leagues. Um,
Did you play
and
basketball with them?
I ended up coaching a team there while I was there. I played in a separate league
Okay. Okay.
because in the division I was working at, they couldn't get enough guys. So
Okay.
I just had my group of friends outside of work that I ended up,
Right.
you know.
Fun, fun, fun. So, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you've got deadlines today and every day probably, but I did want to ask because we're talking post SDCC and conventions starting to come back now. What was it like? I went actually the year I had a panel there the year right before COVID, so I was like,
Okay.
oh, thank God I went, and it was like wild and crazy. And I'm curious, like, how was the convention, and did you enjoy it, and was it kind of like has it been eased in? What's the scene like these days?
San Diego Comic-Con is an experience. So, I encourage people in the future, if you have an opportunity to come, come. It is somewhat slightly expensive show because the hotels
The
jack up all the
hotels
prices. You
and
have to get a room.
the stress
Huh?
of getting a hotel is stressful.
Yeah, that's stressful. But once you get there, it is fun. This was my
Yes.
30th. My first one was 1992.
Wow.
I'm aging myself. I'm probably that's even older than most of your viewers. Um,
That's not true.
I went the first time I went was an amateur. I had
Okay.
brought my portfolio with me to
Oh, to
show all the
show people.
companies. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, conventions was a great way for artists to, under one roof, all the companies are
Mhm.
there. So if you schedule your time correctly, you can go to company by company by company and show all the editors your work. And then in the downtime, you go to the artist alley and you show your favorite artists your work and
Yeah.
try to get their critique and see if you can learn something from what they're offering
And
you.
who did you show in 92?
In 92, I showed it to everybody. I went with my mentor at the time, Michael Davis.
Okay.
Encouraged myself and my best friend, John Paul Leon, to go out. Um, we brought our portfolios along. He introduced us to everybody that he knew at the time
Okay.
in the company. He was just about to start Milestone, um, which is a imprint, which was the imprint of DC Comics. And so he introduced us to all the editors at DC, and we also showed our stuff to everybody that we could. Basically, at that time, you just have to wait in line.
Mhm.
Nowadays, you have to submit everything beforehand because
Mm.
it's just so massive.
It's yeah.
On the very last day, before we're going to go back to the airport to fly back to Miami, there was a small company called Valiant
Yeah.
right by the doorway. And I said, John, let's just go there and let's just wait. We still have plenty of time to get to the airport. And let's just one more. What is it? What would it hurt? Right. At the time, John Paul and I were up for drawing a book called Static. Static, you might have heard of Static Shock now, which was been an animated TV show and
Mhm.
many numerous comics. So John Paul and I were up for drawing that book. They eventually went with John Paul after the show, but at the time I went to Valiant, I showed my work to a guy named Bob Layton. Bob is credited as one of the modern day co-creators of Iron Man. And so Bob looked at my work and he was like, "Oh, this is pretty good. When you come back to school in the fall, in a month or so, make sure you give me a call." So um, that was kind of how it started. And at first, I walked in, I thought he was just gonna look at my work again and give me another critique, but when I walked into the office, he was like, "Hey, I remember you. Here's the first story, your first professional work." I left that afternoon with my first professional assignment and a stack of comic books to read because there's all these new characters and stuff like that. A few weeks in from that project, I hadn't finished my first project. Bob said, we love what you're doing, Bernard. We want to launch a brand new book with you, a brand new #1 series. Um, and at the time, I was very young and I was very brass. So I said to Bob, Bob, I will draw this book on one contingency. If you make the lead an Asian American male, and an Asian American male that doesn't know Kung Fu, but is a lover, not a fighter. And then I went home, I went back to the dorm I had basketball practice. I also went to basketball practice and went back to the dorm. And I'm thinking like, at the age of 20, I'm already demanding things, right? Is my career going to be over? I went back the following week to turn in more work. And Bob pulled me aside into his office and said, Bernard, you got your book. And it became a book. Title was called The Second Life of Dr. Mirage. And it debuted like a half year later in the top 10 of all comics sold that month. So part of that is like, growing up in the States, again in Florida specifically, not a lot of Asians.
Yeah.
The only time I got to see an Asian face on television was Sunday afternoon Kung Fu theater, where they would dub, all the Kung Fu movies.
Yeah, the Shaw Brothers.
But my pitch to Bob was like, look, there's not a lot of Asian representation in comics. I can bring some authenticity to this. If we locate the book in Miami, I can tell you that most books are in New York City. This might be a different flavor, but I can also bring that experience, but I can also bring the Asian American experience into the book. And the rest of the stuff, superhero stuff, whatever. And kudos to Bob. I mean, he's like my second father.
Yeah.
He agreed. And part of that is, again, it's great to see all the Asian representation in media these days. I do think, on one hand, while it's also great to see all of these projects out, we also need to support those projects through actual physical buying of a ticket.
Exactly.
Or buying of a book.
Yeah.
There's still a constant threat of like, I think back in the 90s, there was like, there's never going to be a lead female action movie, right? And until a couple came out and became blockbusters, then that kind of shattered that particular ceiling. Because there's all these kind of like hypotheticals or all these kind of stereotypes that are built in to what sells or what doesn't sell, right? And but it's great to see a lot of these projects. Gene's American Born Chinese is going to be soon going to be a television show. Excited to see how that is translated. Buddy Cliff Chang just had Paper Girls out on Amazon last week.
Love.
So there's so many more there's so many more opportunities out there.
Absolutely. It's definitely shifting and it's so positive too. It's super exciting, but for artists like yourself who are helping do that work, and pushing and putting your jobs on the line and advocating, like we appreciate it because it does mean something to be able to pick up a book and see yourself not stereotyped and just represented as a person who is, feeling something or doing something and not because it's this mythical creature, right? So much appreciated for all the efforts you're doing there and for just creating really beautiful artwork. So so thank you. But I don't want to take up too much more of your time so you can meet those deadlines, but maybe you'll come back and we can like delve into more things. This was so much fun and I learned so much. I just get to listen to all of your amazing stories. So
yeah, sorry I talked too much.
No, it's a podcast about you. So this is what it's about. So but hopefully next time. And we can continue the conversation. But I will link, of course, all of that here for listeners to do exactly that, to actually purchase the the comic books and all of the things that we talked about. I'll link all of that here. And if there's anything else that you'd like to share that you're working on that you want our listeners to know about, please let me know.
Well, just the Monkey Prince,
Yep.
from DC Comics. The first 6 issues are out. I'm working on the second half, the 7th through 12th. It's a
Mhm.
limited series. So, hit your local comic book store. You can also get it digitally if you just
Mhm.
want to read it on your iPad or phone. And I don't think you have to know anything about Sun Wukong, Journey to the West to
Yeah.
kind of understand. There are little Easter eggs if you are familiar with the characters. Zuba Jian, Pigsy is
Mhm.
kind of now in the mentor, and
Oh,
Monkey
okay.
Prince is the son of the Monkey King,
Right.
um, who kind of rediscovers that he's actually the son of this, um, once
Legend.
mischievous,
Yeah.
rebellious monkey, and who fought off the gods, and now is integrated into the DC universe. So,
Yeah.
the Monkey Prince fights Batman and Robin in the first 4 issues,
Yeah.
and in the second arc, he's out in Amnesty Bay, which, if you know about DC Comics, he's now in the world of
Yeah.
Aquaman and Black Manta. So, um, it's fun for me. I mean, aside from being a pro athlete, which I never had the skill set to be, but um, this is like the next thing I wanted to do as a kid. So
Mhm.
I'm really getting to live my childhood dreams, and I can't be more grateful for the opportunities that I've had, and also now meeting yourself and through Gene, and it's just really a very fortunate life, um, and but it's all about storytelling,
Yeah.
um, and sharing stories, and Gene is a master of that. Um, and I hope if you guys pick up a copy of Monkey Prince, you'll enjoy it, you'll read it, share it with your kids, or just share it with yourself, your
Yep.
friends. Um,
Absolutely.
so that's
All
it.
right. Well, thank you so much, Bernard. This was such a pleasure. And for those of you listening, Monkey Prince issues are already out, so you can purchase them, and new issues are coming. He's actually drawing them while we spoke. So thank you
Right,
so
yeah.
much, Bernard. We will talk soon.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifumimi Chan Show. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifumimi-chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifumimi-chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.